Welcome back, all you ghost ghouls and things that go bump in the night. I don't know about you guys, but I rely on coffee to get me through the day. And I kind of wish that I had the experience. Well, maybe I don't wish for this particular experience, but I was fascinated by the experience that today's story told. So, grab something to drink, sit back, relax, and listen to The Coffee Shop. I'm not sure where to start with this. I don't even know why it feels like a story I need to tell after so long. It's been 10 years, but I still remember everything so clearly. Maybe there's a reason for that. I don't really know. 2011 was a strange year for me. I grew up in a medium-sized town about 2 hours north of the state capital. 18 years in the same house, on the same street, in the same town. I only went to 2 schools. I'd never moved houses in my life. I did okay in school. Not great, but not really bad either. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, what to focus on. When I graduated, I ended up feeling lost. The first few months after graduation were all drinking and partying with my school friends. Time moved on, and they moved on too, spreading out all over the country as they went off to college and started new chapters of their own lives. I got sort of left in the wake. My parents were good about it. They didn't put pressure on me to know what I wanted to be, or to apply to colleges if I didn't know why I was applying. They suggested I take the year to figure things out, to work and experience life outside the world of a school kid. They hoped it would give me some direction, a chance for new experiences. The first experience I wanted was to leave that town. It was a good place to grow up. Not so small that everyone knew everyone else, but not so big it felt overwhelming. As I got older, it started to feel smaller, less comforting and more suffocating, especially after my friends left. When they went, I knew I had to leave too. It was my sister who pushed me the most to move out. We've always been close, even though she's 10 years older than me. I think she knew what was happening to me, how I felt. She had ended up in a career completely different from what she studied. It made her happy to have found her niche, but I think she always wanted to be a kid again, right on the edge of being an adult, with all of the chances to figure out who you could be. She wanted things to be like that for me. That's how I ended up living with her. I moved 2 hours south on a Sunday afternoon. She drove to my parents' house, the same house she grew up in too, to pick me up and take me and my stuff away. I didn't have much, just clothes and a guitar my parents gave me when I turned 18. I didn't really know what to do when I moved in. I was fresh out of school, fresh out of home. It took a while to realize that Dad wasn't going to cook dinner every night, that Mom wasn't doing my laundry anymore. It felt good once I figured it out. It was nice to make my own decisions, to rely on myself. I felt independent for the first time, like my own person. I was in control. It was about 6 weeks later that I met Simon. My uncle took me out for dinner. He was living pretty close to my sister back then, and we caught up a lot. Looking back, I think he knew I was lonely and still adapting to being away from home. We were sitting in the front window of some Thai place sharing noodles when he told me. Simon's looking for someone to work for him. They've opened a new coffee shop not far from your parents' house. I told him you were looking for a job. He sat there staring at me as I chewed my mouthful. You still are, aren't you? Nodding, I swallowed. Who's Simon? He owns the place down the street from me, that organic coffee shop. I've definitely told you about him. I've never made coffee before, I said. It was busy outside, people all wandering the streets after work, looking for bars or restaurants. My uncle waved my words aside. If he likes you, he'll train you. What do you think? It didn't sit right with me, the thought of moving back home. I was just starting to adjust to being moved out, independent. But, as much as I didn't like it, I needed to work. I had some savings from summer jobs and things like that, but it wasn't going to last forever. Plus, I was starting to get bored sitting around the house all day while my sister was at work. The next week, I caught the bus out to where my uncle's business was and met Simon. He wasn't who I was expecting, based on what my uncle said. I arrived just as the shop was closing. Simon invited me in and sat me down with a drink to explain the business to me. This coffee shop was sort of half coffee, half shop. Simon and his wife were really ethical people, and they started their business as a way to maximize that positive impact. If you wanted to be dismissive, you could call them hippies. They didn't look like it, though. Simon was just a regular guy with soft eyes and a thick beard. I think he said he used to be in construction. They sold everything in the shop without a profit. It was all handcrafted stuff made by refugees and charities. Bags and candles, incense and decorative things. All of the money went straight back to whoever made it. The only part of the business that made money was the cafe. The cafe, Simon explained, pays for everything else. He waved his arm around the room. I looked around, confused. I didn't get the concept of a business that didn't make money, but I was just a kid. As long as he paid me, I didn't really mind about the ethical side of what they did. I don't know why, but he ended up offering me the job. I came back the next day, and every day that week, learning to make the coffee. Simon showed me how to check the texture of the grounds, how to tamp it with just the right amount of pressure so the espresso isn't weak or burned. He taught me how to texture the milk exactly right for every drink. I learned a lot that week. And that weekend, I moved back home. My parents were happy to have me back. As much as they wanted me to go out into the world and succeed, I think a part of them wasn't quite ready for me to be an adult. I met Simon outside the new coffee shop on a Monday. It had rained the night before, and that smell still hung in the air. Dirt, and dust, and water. They had renovated an old house, converting it into the shop. The front was all windows, facing a quiet street just off the main shopping strip. All of the central walls had been knocked out of what would have been the living room and kitchen, leaving an open room flanked on each side by old brick walls. The space was filled with tables and surrounded by shelves of fair trade gifts. The counter and coffee machine were in front of the far wall, towards the back and next to a hallway. Down the corridor was the door to the storeroom and a toilet. On the other side of the far wall, across from the coffee machine, was the open doorway to the kitchen area. I think the owner said it was from the late 1800s, Simon said. I mean, look at the brickwork. I looked it over, and it definitely seemed old. I didn't know exactly how to reply to the comment, so I kept quiet, pouring beans into the grinder. It was what he said next that caught my attention. You think you'll be all right on your own from tomorrow? He had just unbolted the front door. There was a bell on top, attached to a curved piece of springy metal. It gave a bold jingle as he made sure the door was unlocked. I stared at him. On my own? Yeah. I know you can handle it. I need to be back at the main store. We've only just opened here and it's pretty quiet at the moment. I'll come by once or twice a week to restock everything, and you can always call if you need help. I stood there, wondering if he was crazy. I was just a kid, 18 and straight out of school. He'd only known me for a week, and he was leaving his whole business for me to run on my own. I'd have been terrified about it, but all I could think of was being alone in the building. I had a strange feeling about it, a sort of tension, like a rubber band being stretched from one brick wall to the other. Knowing it was over 100 years old made the tension pull tighter. It just seemed dark and unwelcoming in there. I just nodded. He was taking a huge chance on me, and I didn't want to let him down. The rest of that first day was good. It was quiet, and I think we only made about 20 coffees for the whole day. I didn't know anything about running a business, but I remember thinking it must be hard for a new shop to get people to know about them, especially being off the main street. There was almost no one walking past. That whole week turned out to be pretty uneventful, other than the Tuesday without Simon. That was terrifying. I had problems with the pressure in the coffee machine and with balancing the cash at the end of the day. I think I called him about 10 times. Wednesday was better, and by Friday I had mostly gotten used to the rhythm. There was always a bit of a rush in the morning from a few of the nearby businesses. Workers would come in for a morning coffee on their way into the office. I started to learn their names and what drinks they would order. Then it would be completely dead until around 11, when a few old ladies might come in and browse for a while. Sometimes they'd sit down and get something to drink. Other times they'd just leave. I'd have my lunch around 12:30 and then keep busy until 4:30 when it was time to close up. The second week, I brought a book with me. There was more downtime than work, and I was already starting to get bored. Every time I heard the bell on the door, I would pretty much jump up, excited to have something to do, someone to talk to. Then, the bell started going off when no one was coming in. I was washing coffee cups the first time it happened. The sink was in a back room across from the coffee machines. You might have been able to look up and see the front door from it, but there was a shelf in the way. I had gloves on because of the hot water. The bell startled me and I rushed to pull the gloves off so I could go out and greet them. It was already clear that we weren't making much money, and I didn't want to let Simon down by missing a potential customer. I dropped the gloves in the stainless steel counter next to the sink and left the kitchen. It was silent, but there was a distinct feeling. Someone was standing out there, like their presence was pushing the air outwards. I stepped around the shelf and looked out into an empty room. Not a sign of a person anywhere. The skin on my back crawled. I tried to shrug it away. Maybe they opened the door, looked in and saw it empty, so they left. I went back and finished washing dishes with an uneasy weight in my stomach. I tried to tell myself I felt bad because I'd missed a customer, but the lie didn't help. I knew I had felt someone in the building. I could still feel it, that slight increase in pressure. That feeling stuck with me all afternoon. I was sitting behind the counter, deep in my book, when the bell went off again. Cold flashed through my stomach and over my face, tightening my skin. I looked up to see one of the regulars walking over. "Hey, Emma." I smiled, relieved. "Same as usual?" She smiled back. "Absolutely. What are those muffins?" "Raspberry and white chocolate. Do you—" She nodded. I made her coffee and bagged up the muffin. She left her cash and walked out through the door. The bell rang behind her. came in through the back door and set up like normal the next day. It was a cold morning, dull, gray, and cloudy. The coffee machine had a timer, so by the time I arrived, it was at full pressure and ready to go. The knockbox beside it for the used coffee grounds was full, so I dumped it out into a bucket and carried it down the hallway to the back door. Simon had a dedicated bin outside to collect the coffee grounds. He donated it to a farm somewhere to use as fertilizer. As I was tipping it out, the ringing bell drifted out the open door. "We're not open yet," I called down the hallway. The bell called back. It was louder, more insistent. I shook out the last of the grounds and stepped back inside, locking the back door. The bell stopped. I rushed down the hall and into the shop, dropping the bucket beside the counter. It was empty, but filled again with that sense that someone was standing there. Tension dragged one brick wall towards the other, threatening to crush me. The lights were out, but I could still tell from the gray glow coming through the front windows. No one was there. I crossed to the door, thinking I'd open it and look down the street to see if anyone was nearby. I hadn't unlocked it yet. The security bolt was still buried in the floor, the handle locked tight. I shook the door. The bell jiggled slightly, but not enough for it to ring. Whatever made it chime did it from inside. I switched on every light I could, double-checking every room. My pulse crowded my throat, making each breath a gasp. They were all empty. I was alone. Just me and whatever it was I could feel taking up space in the middle of the room. It hung just behind my neck, the tension following me, almost staring. It only started to ease when Simon came in just past 10 a.m. He had fresh coffee beans, a ladder, and a stack of paintings to sell for a local women's group. He showed me how to hammer a nail securely into the brickwork so we could hang the paintings. I felt good while he was there. The feeling of pressure, of something I couldn't see being there, washed away while he was around. Maybe I was just nervous. A kid that's still a bit scared of the dark, scared of being somewhere alone. I made us both coffees, and we sat and drank in silence. As much as I wanted to tell him about the bell, I couldn't. I felt bad. I didn't want to let him down. He left just after lunch, and I got to work putting up the paintings. It felt good to have something to focus on, and I started to forget about the bell. A few customers came in and out while I was up on the ladder, and I would have to climb down and rest the paintings on the floor against the wall. They would smile at me and ask about the art while I made their drinks, giving suggestions about which painting should go where. That was a good distraction, and I left in the afternoon, not really sure how many paintings I had hung up. I knew it was probably about half, and I could do the rest the next morning. Every painting was on the floor when I arrived at work the next day. All of them. All sitting neatly on the floorboards, resting against the brickwork. I felt sick looking at them. I hadn't hung them all up, but I knew I did some. I remembered doing at least half. They hadn't fallen down. I saw the nails still firmly in the wall. Someone had lifted them off and put them on the floor deliberately. My hand shook as I started to call Simon. I could hear his voice in my head. "I thought I could trust you. I thought you could handle this on your own." I hung up halfway through dialing. The guilt rising in my chest somehow drowned out the tension, stretching from wall to wall, the sense that something was in there with me again. The rest of the day was fairly normal. A decent amount of people came in, both for coffee and just to browse. It felt better to have some life in there, something to cover up the disquiet. I started running low on skim milk that afternoon and put a call through to our supplier, scheduling a delivery for the following morning. Fear prickled my neck as I locked the door that afternoon. I rushed closing up, desperate to be out of that building. I got home to find the house empty. My confusion only lasted a moment before remembering my parents were out of town for a few days, staying in the city with my sister. I didn't like being alone there. It made the house, the only house I'd ever lived in, feel wrong. Normally, it didn't bother me to be home on my own. I was pretty used to it with my sister moving out when I was so young. But that night felt different. I made dinner and paced the living area, music playing as a distraction. Every time I looked down towards the floor, I couldn't help picturing a painting sitting on it, leaning back against the wall at an angle. My back prickled, unfriendly eyes boring into it from behind. After a while, I gave up and went to bed. I wasn't tired. I just didn't know what else to do. The house was so quiet I barely slept, a whole night laying there and listening to every tiny sound, drowning in the sense that something was in my room with me, glaring at me. The milk was sitting outside the back door when I arrived at work the next morning. Barely awake, I dragged the crate inside and went through my normal routine of setting up for the day. The green crate sat in a hallway outside the storeroom as I moved around. The place was still thick with an overwhelming energy, filled with a sense that I wasn't the only person there. I could feel constant eyes on me like an unwelcoming stare. The paintings were all where I'd left them, propped up against the walls. My stomach clenched when I heard the bell ring. I was in the kitchen, bringing out clean cups. I put the tray down and slowly stepped into the main part of the shop. At the counter was an old lady who came in once or twice a week and ordered tea. Her smile washed over me, easing the nausea inside. I must have unlocked the door already. I smiled back at her and started preparing her order. She made a comment on the clouds outside. I nodded, just relieved to have the smallest amount of company. She looked past me as I handed her drink over the counter. "Oh, you shouldn't leave milk out like that, you know. It'll go sour." I turned around to see the green crate still outside the storeroom door. "Sorry," I gave a limp smile. "It's a one-man show here at the moment." She paid, thanked me, and left. I looked back at the milk. Not wanting to be interrupted, I quickly bolted the front door and put up a "back in 5 minutes" sign. The storeroom door opened outwards. I propped it open with the crate and started transferring the milk into the fridge. Both sides of the storeroom were lined with shelves, with the fridge on the far back wall. I put 2 bottles in the fridge and came back for more. As I turned away from the door, I heard it and felt sick. The bell. Then came footsteps, moving heavily over the floorboards. My body locked up, stranding me in front of the fridge. I wanted to turn and look at the doorway to see what was coming, but I physically couldn't. The footsteps stopped outside the storeroom. I was frozen in place, feeling those eyes stare into my back. Tension stretched across the room, a rubber band ready to snap. Whatever was there pushed the crate aside and slammed the door. There was no light in the storeroom. I was surrounded by darkness, my breath catching in my chest as if my lungs had forgotten how to work. The milk bottles were still cold, chilling my fingers until they hurt. I couldn't put them down. My body stopped responding. I stood there in the dark, surrounded by shelves filled with coffee and sugar and hot chocolate powder. I felt nothing but hatred. Energy was pulsing through the locked door, stabbing me. It was so unwelcoming, so openly hostile. At some point I started to cry, silent tears that ran effortlessly over my face. The footsteps started again, heavy and slow. They were in the hallway, right outside the door. They passed through, crossing the floorboards in the storeroom. I could feel them step closer, the staring eyes unwavering on my back. It made the darkness thicken, pushing towards me in a wave. In the voice. You could call it a voice, even though it didn't say anything that sounded like words. It was a low rumble, muted like it was underwater, an endless, unbreathing stream of deep sound that was both unmistakably human and something completely unknown. The hate and malice were clear. Without words, I knew exactly what it wanted.
Leave. Now.
The door swung open, that energy dissipating instantly. I blinked in the harsh light. Dropping the milk, I wiped tears from my eyes. My hands were shaking. I ran through the store, checking everything. The front door was still bolted. The paintings were all leaning against the wall. The kitchen and the bathroom were empty, the back door locked. There was no one there. I grabbed my stuff and walked out. On my way home, I called Simon and told him I was sick. He told me not to worry. He'd drive down and cover me until I was feeling better. The next day, I went in and gave him my keys. He said he was sad to see me leave, that I'd been a good employee. He was trying to make me feel better, I guess. It didn't work. I felt like I'd let him down, but at the same time, I didn't care. Whatever was in that place, I couldn't spend another second with it. He called out as I was leaving, "I thought you were going to hang the paintings up." I shrugged and walked out through the door, the bell ringing as I left. I don't know much of what happened after I stopped working there. They didn't stay open very long, I know that. Whether it wasn't well advertised or just in a bad spot, the coffee shop never made much money, and I guess it was too much of a cost to cover their other store to keep it open. My parents still live in that town, in the same house I grew up in. I moved back in with my sister after I left, worked a few cafes, then went off to college. I go back home a few times a year to see my parents. Every time I make the effort to drive down that street and look at the building. Part of me wants to know what's inside there, why it's filled with so much hate and resentment. I'm probably better off not knowing. Every time I drive past, there's a new business in there, but they never seem to last very long. And that, my lovely listeners, is the story of the coffee shop. Have you ever been in a place that gives you those kinds of vibes? If so, I'd really like to hear about it. Please send me an email at hauntedhorrorstorian@gmail.com or find me on Facebook under the Haunted Horrorstorian podcast. That's all for this story. So, until next time, stay spooky, and remember, sometimes it's more than just a story.